Hey there, senior leader, and welcome to the Talent Triple Podcast, where senior leaders come to rethink how human capital works. I'm your host, Jackson Lynch, and joining me on this journey is my good friend, Scott Morris. Scott's a seasoned CHRO. He has started his own firm at Propulsion AI. He's got the scar tissue to prove every bit of wisdom that's been hard-earned he's going to share with us here. And really the intention of our time together is going to be to dive deeper into kind of how human capital really should work, which is not necessarily how it's always worked. So with that, let me start really soft. We'll ask a softball question for you. Scott, I understand you have an out-of-the-box take on how org design works. What is it?
So, okay, let's imagine something for a second, Jackson. Let's imagine you're my HRBP and I'm a manager in your organization and I just got finance approval and I'm going to put a new role on my team. And I come to you and say, Jack, I'm going to put a new role on my team. What's the first thing you ask me?
What does the job do?
That's right there where we go wrong. Like that I think we're asking all of the wrong questions. And if we're going to serve our population of managers, if we're going to serve the organization, we've got to start shifting these questions. What the role does is less consequential than what it achieves. And yet we never start with that. Why are we not starting with results? Why are we starting with activities? And I mean, there is a science-based reason. You've written a blog post about it, and I thought it was a great post on your Substack. But, focusing on what the job does is a way that we box people in, that we put them in the position where they do exactly what we tell them to and no more. But today, we can't afford that anymore. What we need is people who will act with initiative, who will become accountable, who will think of themselves as owners of that work. And to do that, we've got to get away from what the job does, the means, and get into what the job achieves. That's got to be our starting point. What do you think?
Well, I think you set me up for that one pretty good. So I want to thank you in advance for it. Because we did our little pre-meeting talk and I said, well, what are the outcomes? He's like, no, don't answer it that way. Answer it the way. And then you gave me the buzzer. So I see how this is going to play. Look, I think that as a human capital function for years, we have overly focused in on activities. And the activities, there may be some good reasons for that. I think you've done some research that say it's really tied into how our dopamine works. I'm not as smart as you, so I don't fully understand what all that means, other than we need to think about what job design looks like just differently than what we have. And historically, the activities has been easy. It's been safe. It assumes a static environment with no need to learn or apply. And that's just not the way the business works. Not now, and I might argue it never really did. So if you can find the 3 to 5 things that people deliver, the outcomes, where if they do those things and only those things, that they will be considered an A player. Now you've designed a job that allows it to be easier to search for the folks, to screen the folks, to onboard the folks, to get their speed to impact up as high as we can, and ultimately to manage their performance. And I just, by the way, if you're wondering where I got all that from, it's from a group called Topgrading. And they wrote a big book, Brad Smart, and and right now it's being run by Chris Mursau, who will be joining us later in the episode. So it's, I cheated a little bit there, but why do you think people focus so much on activities, Scott?
Well, there are a couple of reasons. One is that the activity is what you see every day. But you think about the situation we're in, especially post-COVID right now, and a lot of organizations are struggling with this, Jackson. The remote work versus in-person work. Remote work, you've got to be outcomes focused. If you want to have a workplace that is a hybrid workplace, you are going to have to rethink the way you manage your people, and you have to manage them around results because they're not going to be present for you to see the activity. But I think that's the number one driver. People want to see the activity happening. Do you know what? Let me make this really clear for anybody listening, right? Let's take the example of an accountant. Something we would typically find in the job description of an accountant is a responsibility that says follow up on delinquent accounts. Who cares? Right? That's a means to an end. Do we need to see that person sweating away at their desk, making phone calls to people that don't want to get them or writing emails to people that aren't going to read them? The real purpose of following up on delinquent accounts is to reduce days outstanding. It's a measure of how fast we collect money in the organization, right? And there's a real financial value. If I tell somebody your job is to make phone calls, they make phone calls. If I say your job is to reduce days outstanding from this level to this level, they get creative. And that's what we need. We need everybody being creative. As the boss, I want to be in a position where the employee comes to me and says, hey, Scott, like, if that's my job, shouldn't I be doing these things? And I want to be the guy slapping my head going, well, I didn't even think of that. Yes, do that, right? So I set the outcome and I let the tactics be flexible. And in doing that, I create purpose in the job because they're working towards something that really means something to the organization, not making a phone call, reducing days outstanding and creating a monetary bottom line value to the organization. I also put them in a position where they can be autonomous, right? They understand what they're trying to get to. Go work out the tactics. Go be creative with it, right? Come check with me if you need to, but you and I are both focused on the same North Star. You've got a really interesting way of getting to this too. And you call it, I think you call it so what or so that. It's so that, not so what. Sorry, it's so that, right? Talk about that a little bit because I think it gets to the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I wish I could claim credit for it. It's Dave Ulrich's, but I've used it for years, and it's really a way to add to the end of whatever kind of outcome you're focused in on from an HR perspective to make sure it's appropriately connected in with the business outcome. So back to your example, I may deliver some management training for the folks in the accounts payable department. Historically, HR folks have relied on vanity metrics of like how many people did we train, or how long have we trained, or what was the entertainment value for the NPS for the training. But if you add the term "so that" to the end of it, you will then start tying it in why you're accomplishing it, and that allows you to better measure and define the outcomes. So I'm giving this leadership training so that I reduce my days on hand, so that I can have better working capital. Now I have, with just 2 questions, I have unlocked my ability to have a return on investment discussion. And this is the great part of where we are from a human capital perspective. If you do that well, you're going to be in a unique position because it is such an under leveraged lever that if you can do it and you're battling others for capital, you'll win every single time. But you can't have it as a cost. You have to have it as a lever. I would like $25,000 for us to develop and deliver a frontline manager leadership class to the accounts payable team so that we shorten our days on hand, so that we free up $2 million in working capital. Like, folks will pay for that out of their own damn pocket. Versus, right. I'd like $25,000 to go give leadership training to accounts payable. Okay, well, where is that in your budget? So I think it just fundamentally changes the way you do the work.
It's 2 sides of the same coin. One, we're talking about the role. The role's got to have a so that too, which is the outcome base. And your actions as an HR leader have to have a so that basis. Right. I think is interesting about this that I hadn't thought about when we've talked about this before is that in doing these things, in flipping the HR leader's mindset to outcomes focused first rather than activity focused, we get a couple of things. We get roles that have meaning and purpose that are more engaging and are focused on the right things. And we get the voice that HR has always wanted to have in the debate about where the business is going. And it's not a cost center anymore, right? We're now driving something that's really meaningful. And I think across the board, that's got to be important.
So then the question is, how do we provide something very practical for folks that are watching and listening to be able to put it into practice? And the answer is, we're going to bring in a guest occasionally. And today we're going to bring in Chris Mursau, who is the president of Topgrading. And what I'd like to do is kind of lean into this and have you announce that we have a guest.
Hey, guess what? We have a guest so that people get to hear somebody other than us.
It's our first podcast, Scott. They can't be bored with us all.
Oh, well, there you go. So let's dive deeper into this. And we have a guest. You want to introduce him?
Yeah, I'd love to. This is an old friend of mine. That's not just because he's old, but he's also a friend. It's Chris I freaking never get your name right. Chris Mursau. Mursau.
Perfect.
Mursau. He's the president of Topgrading, and I've known Chris for 15 years, so long ago that I don't even need to remember how to pronounce his last name anymore. But Chris is one of the guys that early in my career helped me to understand the importance of focusing on outcomes, and that is exactly what Topgrading is all about. And so, I guess my lead in to you, Chris. First off, thank you so much for joining us. But at a very high level, can you give us kind of some understanding of the concepts behind top grading?
Yeah, so happy to do it. Thanks for having me, guys. It's great to be here. And uh, the top grading at a high level, what we're trying to accomplish, the outcome that we are helping our clients achieve is a higher percentage of A players. And we're really known for our ability to implement the system we created and then implement it with our clients, a hiring system that yields more A players hired. So high performers who fit your culture really well, kind of behave the way you would expect an A player to behave. Good team member, good manager. If we're talking about your manager, whatever it may be, you like working with the person. And there are some important tenets or steps in top grading. And the first one is what we are talking about. It is defining. When I say A player, we all have a little bit different idea of what A player is in our mind. And A player differs from one company to the next, and depending on the size and business model and industry and whatnot. And so we first need to define A player. And half of that definition I mentioned is high performer. It is not doer of lots of stuff. And so we need to define high performance with some numbers and dates and times and percentages and dollars and whatever else may go along with it. OKRs are part of our definition of outcomes or results, as are KPIs. And so that's what we do. That's where we start with this conversation about we need to hire a fill in the blank. We first talk about what results do you need the person in that spot to deliver. So that's the first part of top grading, defining a player for that role. And then there's another problem in hiring. And the problem is even bigger now than it was 18 months to 2 years ago. And that is resumes are a candidate's highlight reel. And now they have ChatGPT and every other LLM to help them make their highlight reel even more impressive, whether it's true or not. And so we need a way to cut through the hype. I mean, and we're not going to blame candidates. They put their best foot forward because they're trying to put their best foot forward, and we're not blaming them for that. But when they do that and we take what is on that resume or that CV as gospel, we're going to get it wrong too often. So it's really simple. And everyone who's listening, if you're hiring people, do this and you will hire better. And this is, we call it the top grading truth motivator. For any of you who have known top grading for a long time, it also is the TORC technique, TORC, threat of reference check. And really, it's not a threat. It is just letting candidates know early on that we're going to ask them to arrange for reference calls with managers they've reported to in the recent past. So they know we're going to verify what we've heard and the things that are on the resume, and we can then rely on what we learn about them throughout the rest of the hiring process. I'm going to jump till the very end. Connected with that truth motivator is actually following through with that, in quotation marks, threat. And that is at the end, right before a job offer, ask them to arrange reference calls with managers they've reported to recently so you can verify what you've heard along the way. And in between there, another problem is a typical interview. Half hour, 45 minutes long, maybe an hour. And especially when we're talking about, accountants and engineers and the people who manage our accountants and engineers and salespeople and their leaders, you can't get to know someone well enough in half hour, 45 minutes, or an hour to both say they're a great culture fit and they can deliver the results that we expect. And so when we get down to the list of finalist candidates, we slow it down and we get to know them well by listening and guiding them through their life story. We call it cleverly a top grading interview. It's really a deep dive interview, chronological, in-depth, and structured. Yeah, and we talk about every experience they've had since high school, focusing on what they've done in the most recent 10 years so we can see patterns of behavior. So we know who we're looking for up front. We let candidates know that we're going to be verifying what they've heard. When we get down to people we think have the potential to be a player, we really get to know them well so we can read the patterns of behavior and more accurately predict into your situation. And then we verify what we've heard. We do those 4 things in addition to structuring the hiring process, and our clients hire A players a lot more often than they don't.
Yeah. And I think, Scott, you and I have both been through this on both the interviewee and the interviewer side. Is that kind of what you went through?
Yeah, we have.
What was it like being on the candidate side? Do you recall?
I tell you, the thread of reference check is a real motivator. Now, and when I say a motivator, right? Like, I mean, in my top grading interview, I never came in, thinking I'm going to pull the wool over anybody's eyes, but it makes you think really in depth about the specifics that you are sharing, because you want to get them right.
Yeah, especially when I talk to your supervisor, Fred, who we've now agreed is the person you're going to set me up with when we're done. What will Fred tell me about? It changes the nature of the dialogue. So
Jackson, I'm worried a little bit that there's a suitcase term here that we should unpack, and it's the word outcomes. Chris, can you talk a little bit more about how that word applies in what you do and how you think about outcomes?
Yes. And so I use several words kind of interchangeably, and outcomes, results, very, very descriptively measurable accountabilities. And some call them KPIs and others OKRs, and those are kind of just different kinds of results, finite, timeline, or ongoing. And think about results as the impact on the business. And so, you guys were talking previously about culture, and we're going to do a culture survey. And in my head, I'm thinking, so what? Like, okay, we're going to do a culture survey. What are we shooting for here? Like, what are we looking for? One, maybe we do the first one to get a baseline. And in our job scorecards, that could be very well could be the first step. And then that baseline, then we set a target, and then the goal is to achieve that target. We might not know what the target is until we get the baseline, but that's the sequence. Get the baseline, set a target, and then achieve that target within 18 months. So it is measurable. If there are a couple steps along the way, it may make sense to define those. And then what is the ultimate outcome and the time that the time-bound nature of that, if there is a time-bound nature. That's the way we think about it. Now we're creating job scorecards. Do we occasionally put something that's more qualitative than quantitative? Yes, on occasion. Yes, we do. But that is the exception rather than the rule.
So one of the things that Jackson and I were talking about before you came to join us was this notion of, does it always have to be financial? What's your thought on that? Is it always mapping back to the P&L?
Absolutely not. It doesn't need to. And I'm thinking of a client that is incredibly concerned with their culture. They are very proud of being on Fortune's best places to work list, not best places to work in. And Phil, it is Fortune's best places to work, the list. They've been on the top 20 for 20 years, and or top 50 for 20 years. And so culture is really important to them, and part of their culture is being involved in the community. And so for their leaders, on the job scorecard is a community involvement accountability. And what is that? You must have a leadership position in at least one community organization. Doesn't have any direct impact on financials. It is part of the way their business model. And so, but it's measurable. Like, you're either in a leadership position in a community organization or you are not. And so that's the real important thing for us is, one, is that outcome connected to strategy, mission, vision, values in some way, shape, or form? And can we measure it? Can we say, yes, it happened, or no, it didn't?
So, Chris, when you jump in with a brand new client, I'm sure they've already thought through all of these things up front, and there's no lack of clarity as to what people do. But how often do they come to you with job descriptions that are focused in on outcomes versus activities?
At the risk of hyperbole, I will say they never come with job descriptions that have results and outcomes like we are talking about in them. Now, there are, again, a couple of exceptions, but like that is not an exaggeration. We're talking a couple of exceptions where I have said, wow, that is a good job description. We don't need to do much work for the job scorecard. Like, it just doesn't happen.
And why do you think that is? Because when you think through it, it's so straightforward. But my experience is the same as yours. People don't naturally wire themselves to think about the outcomes.
They don't. And I'll admit something, guys, because we, believe it or not, create job scorecards for the people on our team. And even though people pay me to do this often, like I'm creating job scorecards with and for clients weekly. When I sit down to do my own job scorecard for someone on my team, it's hard. And so I don't know why. Like, why? I'm not quite sure. But what I found is an individual manager trying to create job scorecards for their team by themselves in their office, it's hard and it's challenging. It's just hard. However, when we get another person or two or three together in the same spot, virtually or otherwise, and who are familiar with that role, we can get one banged out in a couple or 3 hours. Another important thing is this doesn't happen in 20 minutes.
Yeah.
It takes some discussion, especially with the first one, because that stuff doesn't exist anywhere else. Business decisions are often being made as we are creating the job scorecard for customer service manager.
Talk about that a little bit more, Chris, because Jackson uses this technique that I think is really smart called the so that. We're doing this so that. I've worked in manufacturing. In total quality management, we have a tool called 5 Whys. Mm-hmm. Similar kind of approach, right? You're trying to get down to the root cause. How do you do it in Topgrading? How do you take that role and not accept the first sort of like, oh yeah, I need them to answer, 100% of the emails, because that's not measuring what matters, right?
Yep.
There's something that is the so that underneath it. How do you guys get to it?
So, and we'll just keep quality, not quite, it's not really exactly TQ on, but I'm just going to stay on quality. And you say, hey, we need to improve quality. And we just start asking questions. And the next question is, all right, how will you know if quality is good enough or if it's not good enough? And if we get another qualitative answer, we'll have customer complaints. How many customer complaints? How many customer complaints are too many? And just kind of keep drilling down and drilling down and drilling down until we get to 98% first pass yield. Or less than 2% of our products are returned because of a defect, whatever that may be. But it's not, and I'm using quality, maybe that's a bad example. It's a relatively easy example, especially when we're talking manufacturing quality, relatively easy. But it's seldom that we say, how are we going to measure quality? And a metric with time on it comes out of the mouth as the next answer. So it's important to have, it's important to have a facilitator. So someone who maybe 1 or 2 or 3 people in your organization who facilitate the job scorecards. You are the scribe and you're also the one asking the questions. And by having 1 or 2 or 3 people doing it, found and even Topgrading interviews, kind of connecting, another thing that we do, by having some kind of experts in your organization who do this, they just get better and better and better at it. They get better at being the facilitator, and they're able to draw that stuff out of the hiring managers.
Do you know the technique that I've always used is trying to get people to differentiate between, is it an activity that you can see happening, or is it an impact that gets created through activities? And just trying to get people to make that differentiation, because that's usually, if we're talking about an activity, we're probably not there yet. We got to ask, so why is that important?
Yeah.
And I found that question, that one question repeated, is actually the key to unlocking a lot of this.
Yeah, it totally is. So as we think through kind of moving down the path, now we spent the time, we've built a job scorecard that identifies the 5 to 7 things that if someone were to deliver them and only those things, they're going to be an A player, right? How does that then change the interview process once you're sitting down across from them?
It could potentially change it dramatically. And the reason being is for the better. Yeah, absolutely for the better. Because when you know the specific result that you need from that role, your ear will be tuned to it better. And you'll know when to dig in deeper. You will know what kinds of follow-up questions to ask. So the quality, going back to the quality example, 98% first pass yield. When someone says, I improved quality. Well, the follow-up, like, how did you measure quality or lack thereof? And they'll tell you what the measurement was. You'll say, well, what was it to begin with? And where did you end up? And what was the goal? Because we have the goal. And so you'll just know, because you need to know, like, can this person improve our quality to 98%? And you know what follow-up questions has. That's one of the most challenging parts of interviewing are the follow-up questions. Like, that is art. That is completely freestyle. There's no way you can get a list of follow-up questions, and be able to then pick the one that match what it all has to happen in your head. And it just helps you be better, much better at follow-up questions.
How do you get candidates to be a part of this process? And I guess let me be more pointed with the question, right? Mm-hmm. Candidates have a choice up front as to whether they're going to be in or out of a selection process. And that choice is, do they apply or not? How do you encourage the candidates who are ready to take on the accountability and discourage the ones that aren't?
In your job posting, at minimum, allude to the accountabilities. And if you're feeling comfortable enough to do it without giving away company secrets, put a couple of them in there.
Put the numbers in there. Yeah.
Yeah. Put some numbers in there. And you want to be strategic about that and thoughtful about that, because you want to be thinking, I want this. We want to word this in a way or include things in here that will attract the right people and, have those who may not be a good fit for the high performance organization you're working to build, select themselves out, or deselect, or whatever we want to call that. Okay. And I don't know if you mentioned it yesterday or when earlier in the conversation, when we're talking about building a high performance organization and attracting A players, high performers to work in that high performance organization. Please don't ask me to cite it, but if you want to Google it or use ChatGPT to search, you can find the studies. High performers want to know what the goal is and what they get if they achieve that goal and what they get if they surpass the goal.
Yeah, I don't need a survey to cite from it. Having gone through the outcomes-focused job scorecard, one of the secondary steps to it, and some people skip it, but we've tried to put these involved, is what does that first-year success profile look like?
Yep.
What should you get done by when? And we share that historically. We've shared that very broadly as well. And what that tells people is, I now know what is expected of me at work, which we've talked a little bit in other forums about the Gallup Q12. That's their first question. And it really cements, I think, the foundation of a high-performing organization. So go ahead.
Oh, all right. I'll take this one. So we're talking about the new team member. Let's think about the managers for a second. How effective can you be as a manager if you have not communicated clear expectations to your team? Yeah. If it's all vague and it's like, hey, achieve business results. Well, you're not meeting my expectations, but then I'm thinking, well, I didn't tell you what my expectations are. Yeah. And it's just hard. So when we all lay it out and your new person said, I agree to sell $200,000 of stuff, and they only sold 125, it's a lot easier to have that conversation than if the expectation. So our managers are more effective with this kind of a document as well.
Yeah, and even absent the document, if they've just thought through it, they're going to be inherently farther down the road with the individuals. I mean, the documentation obviously is critical, but just thinking through it matters.
Mm-hmm.
Chris, you said something earlier that I think we need to pull apart. Not all A players are A players in every organization. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. And I'll use a sales example. So you're hiring your salesperson in a branch, whatever kind of branch you want, renting equipment or pest control, whatever it might be, hiring someone to sell from a branch. One branch has been in existence for 20 years and has been growing by 15% steadily. They have a really strong customer base and great general manager. And another branch is brand new. It is a startup. The brand is completely unknown in that geography. And the definition of a player is completely different for both of those. Yes, they have to sell, but this is selling to a bunch of happy customers and keeping them happy and having a pretty strong reputation. Maybe you can get referrals really easily. Again, jump into some conclusions there. More of a farmer. And then you have brand new territory where nobody knows you. And it's, grit and resilience and boots on the ground, knocking on doors and all those other things that we put. However, so often it's the same vague job description for those two roles because it's the same title in those two branches. And so you hire a farmer when you need a hunter, and that's not going to work. And hiring a hunter when you need a farmer, maybe not quite as bad. But too often it's we hire a farmer because they've had a big book of business for 10 years in the last job that they've had. And we get the wrong person. So it's just, it's different. And then when we go, big company versus small company, or a startup versus, more established, or from one industry to another, and those definitions can really, really vary. And so we have to get it right. We have to think about a player in that situation, or we can still hire an A player, but for the wrong job.
Which in my experience is also important to think about. If I have a player who is not an A player for the role I need them in, the reallocation process becomes really important. Mm-hmm. And focusing in on internal mobility that allows you to better connect someone who might be down for the mission of the organization to have the right skill sets to the right opportunity for them to be an A player in those roles is super important. Mm-hmm. Most folks tend to, if someone is failing in the role that they're in today, then they were a failure as an employee and probably as a human being, and we must replace them. And Topgrading at its core is really about allocating human capital to where people can deliver the highest return on the investment of salary and benefits and other costs associated with mm-hmm. that employee.
I would say, for us, our belief is, and again, at the risk of hyperbole, our belief is that everyone can be an A player somewhere. Maybe it's not everyone, but
I've met one.
A vast majority of people can be an A player somewhere. We also believe that people want to be A players. Again, most people want to be A players. They want to be successful at work. And so, sometimes takes us helping them or nudging them to where they can be.
So that, I guess, leads me, Chris, to a question. In your experience, what's the correlation between how clearly an organization defines success outcomes and their ability to attract and retain A players?
So I think probably a little less impactful on the attracting piece.
Okay.
Because you may be able to talk a good game. You may have a really great mission, that people say, I want to save the planet, and therefore I'm going to work there, even though they don't know that, it doesn't sound like they exactly know what I'm going to be doing. I want to take a chance because I want to be part of this. For me, it has a lot more impact on the retention. It's kind of going back to something we talked about a few minutes ago. people who are high performers and have the goal of being high performers at work. They want to know what the rules are, what the targets are, and kind of what they get if they achieve or exceed those targets. And without that, their manager probably won't be as good. Career paths will not be as clear, and the probability that they're going to find something else that does give them a higher probability of achieving their career goals and being super successful is a lot higher.
It looks like you're dying to ask a question, Scott. Jump in.
No, I was going to say, what's the piece of advice, Chris, that you would give to people when they're starting the journey? Let's say they aren't committed. They're learning about focusing on outcomes. Hey, Chris, so maybe some members of the audience are thinking that this sounds really good. Not just top grading, but the whole concept of being outcomes first in your thinking. What's the first step? What advice do you have? How do you start to move toward that thought pattern?
So I'd suggest two things. One, sort of start small and think about it this way. Flash forward to the new hire's 1 year anniversary, and we look back and we are really, really happy they're on the team. We are really happy we hired them. What must they get done? What result must we see for us to be enthusiastic about their being on the team? And just start with one. Like, what is one thing they absolutely must get done? And then make it measurable and whatnot. Not an action. It needs to be an outcome. But just start with one. What is the most important thing? And then just kind of go down the list. And if you get 3 things that they must get done, and they get those 3 things done, and let's say everybody in the company did that, things would be going pretty well for the most part. Would you miss a couple things? Of course. So I think that way, just like, you don't need to list every single thing they need to do. Let's just start with the most important things. I'd also suggest getting your muscles warmed up with a little bit easier role. So a sales role, maybe quality, like we mentioned. This is going to sound fun. Starting with an executive assistant is probably not recommended. It's a little harder because there is a lot of activity in a role like that. And so it's more challenging to come up with what are the outcomes. You can do it. We've done it lots of times, but that's a little bit more challenging. So start off with a role that's measurable.
Let me do one quick follow up with you just to tail onto that. You spend every day, most weeks, counseling those who are learning this method. What's your best technique for overcoming the mid-level manager who doesn't want to lean into this and getting them to realize the value of thinking about outcomes?
Hold them accountable for doing it. How about that? Hold them accountable. So on their job scorecard, create whatever you're going to call this, but list the 5 key outcomes for each of your direct reports by the end of second quarter. But don't just say do it. Give them some help. Like, that's another important thing too, is partner them with someone who does believe in this and who has, is of a mindset like the 3 of us are in this respect, and have them work through it. I've seen the light bulb come on, an hour and a half into the conversation, way more than once, because I'm, on the team or on the Zoom call or whatever it may be. We've got detractors every single day. Like, why are we doing this? Like, just copy, just put job description, engineering manager, manufacturing company into ChatGPT. Like, whatever they say, let's do it. Let's move on. Let's get somebody hired. And when we talk through this and we're making some business decisions and we're changing the role a little bit, maybe from what they even thought it was to begin with, pops on, and you need to talk about this a lot though too. That's not this is change management. And it is not something where you can just say, hey, do it, and it gets done. Exactly why, I'm not sure, but in 25 years, I have, again, not seen it happen.
So this has been an awesome time to get to know three of my brothers in hairstyle. And Chris, thank you so much for joining us. If people want to learn more about top grading, where should we send them?
They can go to topgrading.com, just the way it sounds. TOP grading, GRADING.com, and lots of different things to look at there. If you are not much of a reader, we have a new e-guide that just a little Cliff Notes version. I think it equals about 8 pages of kind of 8 PowerPoints with some content on it. PowerPoint slides is essentially what it is. A little snappier than that, but that's what it is, to give you a little feel for it. And then if your interest is piqued, you can always click on info@topgrading.com and say, hey, I'd love to chat with someone to see if this might be valuable for us.
Outstanding. And again, I could not recommend the work that Chris and the team over there do with more enthusiasm. I've brought it to every company I've been at for the last 15 years, and it works. It's not easy. It's simple, but it's not easy. And when it clicks in, it makes a material difference. So I appreciate it. Hey, I want to thank again Chris for joining, and Scott, my partner on this journey where we can create a HR podcast driven by HR leaders so that we can support each other, making a bigger impact in the communities and in the companies that we serve. So look forward to seeing you next week, and I appreciate y'all.